Another draft physics video production. Let's go through the things sometimes over. Seems to be necessary. So, commenters. Anyway, sorry. Just can't face them with enthusiasm. I guess I should turn on the light. Oh, okay. Sorry. Production I should have taken care of before I turned the camera on. Yeah, my fault. Having a bad day. Yes, only just started. Anyway, so let me get this straight. I hate sentences that start that way. Anyway, a photon is a massless particle. Look at that. Look, you can choose lots of words to use, okay, to describe something, and sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not. As I've pointed out, you can call a paramecium a life form, you can call a human being a life form. It's kind of a silly thing to do. But anyway, and the word massless, what is mass? Mass is something that is affected by gravity. Effectively, the simplest argument I can make to you is, yes, regular physics doesn't understand, so they have to use silly language because they've got it wrong. But photons are force, they're energy. Things that are material can have energy, that is, they can possess it, okay, and appear energetic, but they aren't energy, where the photon is. It's in a class that you can call it as something like a force, or you can call it energy. And those things can't be put in the same category as things that are completely different, which are the little matter bits that are affected by forces. Anyway, I guess another way to say it is, this massless crap is, if the photon were to be stopped in its movement, then it would have no mass. It has no rest mass, which means it doesn't mean anything if it's not moving. And matter can be stationary and still contain what we would call energy, because it has energy in, say, two directions that are opposing each other. So it doesn't go anywhere. Different. And they have to do that because their math is kind of broken, all right, in the sense that they haven't really made clear distinctions between these particles, these little bits of stuff. That's why I've used the word bits instead of particle, because of all the confusion. And so their theory, okay, has bent space in it, for example, and it has virtual photons in it. So they kind of know they have a dilemma. They don't have a source of energy for any of the things that are energetic. They have mechanisms that cause energetic reactions, but they're not made of any force. So they don't really understand. That's not my fault. Alright, that moves at the speed of light, question mark. So, no, I don't agree with your premise. That's nothing I've said. I've never sat there and said a photon is a massless particle that moves the speed of light. Never said that. It's a force, and all the forces move the speed of light. It's a bit of energy. It's the thing that causes gravity. It can't be affected by gravity, so therefore it can't have mass in any mass sense. Even though one of the basic principles of physics says of course, is that nothing with mass can move at the speed of light. So yes, their argument is it doesn't have any rest mass, and all of its mass is a consequence of its velocity. So that's the game they have to play, because they don't have any continuity in their understanding of the difference between forces and the things the forces affect. Okay. The issue then becomes, so as paraphrased by your paraphrase, so you're going to start a conversation with kind of fake axioms that aren't even true to conventional physics and clearly don't have anything to do with my physics. Alright, the issue then becomes, how can a particle be a particle without any mass? Well, I just explained that. It can have no relevance or meaning, no effect, if you take away its velocity, and its velocity is essentially its mass. And I would argue that your velocity, the velocity of the crap inside of you, is what gives you mass. You know, just as a consequence of the fact that the stuff you're made of is made of stuff, and that stuff is doing the both directions at the same time kind of thing. There's pressure pushing in both directions, and if it's equalized, you don't move. All right. Also, if the particle slash photon slash force is in fact a particle, a force, I mean, okay, then how can it move at the speed of light? Look, you know, you don't like that things move the speed of light. I don't know. What's your critique? The fact that stuff does move in the universe, and there's no good way to explain why it does, except it does. There's stuff that has properties, and that's as far as you can go, is just to describe its properties. You can't describe its origin. So I don't think anyone's going to come up with a viable origin explanation for the existence of the distinctions between the properties of forces and matter. Matter's more attainable, but why there's movement in the universe, it's a tough nut. Also, if the particle, oh, we already did that, seems like there's a fundamental contradiction. Well, that's because you're trying to force one to exist. Even in their physics, okay, their mathematics, the contradiction goes away because most equations don't have to deal with the two things at the same time. They're either dealing with the effect or they're dealing with a cause. Let's see, you know, they have enough separation. So in one equation, the photon can be considered massless. In another equation, it can be recognized for its velocity and be just as significant as a particle. So yeah, they have that ability to define it circumstantially, just like wave-particle duality when it comes to light. Depending on how they want to analyze a situation, they can make the geometry, they can make the algebra okay, fit one or the other, and that's the hole they had to leave because like I said, they don't really understand how it works. I mean, I just watched some little Professor Lewin video, or you know, special lecture, and he admits, you know, he doesn't know what they are. You know, he clearly also attempts to assert it's a wave, but he admits, you know, he doesn't have any vision of what a photon is. All right, one might argue that since you are the king of contradictions, so, you know, how so? You didn't point that out in your fucking piece of crap comment. Maybe you might be able to argue your way out of this one. So, first you assert things I've never said. I mean, clearly never said. Okay, I've never argued that a photon doesn't have the capacity to impose energy in a system. Ever. How can I argue the mass issue when I've clearly stated that photons are what gives things mass? They're the things that the thing absorbs to have mass. It doesn't have mass if it hasn't absorbed energy. So, you know, you're just such a piece of shit. I mean, fuck. Could you be shittier? I mean, could you make a worse argument? Can you just, you know, lower your game a few more levels with just false accusations? I mean, could you be, I mean, it's like the fake newsers, you know, accusing people of fake news while they make fake news. I mean, you're such a fake. Okay, so it's not much to say, so fuck you. Alright, so Zohar attempted an explanation, so I probably won't agree with his explanation either. You clearly aren't paying attention. Well, no, he's paying attention, and he's just doing what all the criminals and liars do, and that is pervert and distort. Okay, I'll answer your question, but you are extremely scattered the way you talk, so it's probably not going to be productive. Yes, he's using their jargon and putting it in my mouth, which is really rude. A photon is a force bit. It doesn't have mass until it gets trapped in some arrangement with other force bits to create a matter bit. Well, it clearly has energy. Now, if you don't create any matter in the universe, the force doesn't have anything to hit and therefore becomes irrelevant. So that's a truth. And I've already pointed out these distinctions between, the perfect reflection looks just like the perfect miss. That's just a fact of reality. So even if these particles hit each other, it would be irrelevant, blah, blah, blah. All right. Really stupid question. We use the word mass to describe matter that can attract other matter and such. Beams of light don't fall into that category. Clearly, there's a distinction between the stuff moving the speed of light and the stuff that is made to move by absorbing stuff moving the speed of light, trapping it, like in an Earth orbit, for example. The momentum of the Earth is not going anywhere in particular that we can see. Now, it probably is, in the sense that the original motion that created its precessing orbit is still affecting the thing the Earth is part of, the system it's part of. But from our appearances, it doesn't appear like the Earth's velocity is going anywhere at all. It just keeps traveling the same path. Its capacity to influence the universe has been suspended by staying inside of something. All right. Yeah, so I did number 2, right? Describe matter can attract, yes. So the attraction part is created by the very force you're describing. So you're saying, why isn't gravity affected by gravity? Because it's not. Yeah, simple answer. All the particles move at the speed of light is the point here. All particles, I don't know if I'd use that word. The stuff that is composite, okay, that emerges out of the stuff. So you could just argue that there's stuff, little dots, and I can put the dots in patterns, closer together dots, further apart dots, different ways I could pattern. And which one's the particle and which one's made of particles, so do I call dots the same thing as I call the pattern things made out of dots? Now we're back to what I can't call something a building and then call something brick. They're two different things. They're not the same thing. All right. How? Question mark. That's a dumb question. Oh, sorry. Yeah. He was quoting the other guy's dumbass question. That's a dumb question, and we can't answer that. We can tell you that particles do in fact move at the speed of light, and that's the relevant fact. Yes, exactly. I can't explain why there's a universe. I mean, I could attempt an explanation, but I'm going to be making it up. Obviously you can make ones that sound reasonable or plausible, and you can make up ones that sound stupid. I could say, well, it's the sludge inside Winnie the Pooh's honey pot, and it exploded. That one doesn't sound very viable. Or I could make some technical hooey-booey about, it contracted to a pressure of 5 million zillions of zigatars, and at that point the little round bits get squished and their guts fly out, and the universe explodes. It might be more viable. Anyway, who cares? I don't really care. Anyway, Gary isn't the king of contradictions. You're just a moron who has no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, you're worse. He's worse than that, right? He's obviously worse than a moron. He's some sort of fanatic, okay, attempting to defend some sort of position, and he doesn't want anybody spouting any evidence indicating he might be full of shit. And so he's attacking out of a defensive posture where I have to protect my God. or my unicorn, or my whatever, Winnie the Pooh. He's fighting for some silly drawing in his head, and clearly sees me as some sort of problem that he has to attack. How about try to be clear and concise? Yes, and how about quoting somebody if you're going to make accusations? You know, accusations should come with evidence. You know, it's the way it should work. And ask actual questions instead of being a scatterbrained dumbass who spouts a bunch of unintelligible crap. Well, it sort of was intelligible, but it was clearly snarky, and it was clearly poorly evidenced, and it was clearly erroneous to the evidence. I mean, just not even close to the truth. So yes, it was clearly rubbish. And we will do the appropriate thing. Well, I don't know, maybe we'll leave it. I mean, it's just disappointing. I mean, I go to especially this is the Photon video where I'm basically explaining some new observations that clearly make why there is a particle wave duality, why that there is this problem in nailing this down. Well, the problem is that photons, even though they carry a very little amount of energy, spread over a very wide area. Just the photon's size, its polarization dimensions are so much bigger than single atoms, and yet it's a tiny amount of energy it carries. Alright, so another kook, no doubt. Oh, look at all this crap. I don't know if we want to bother with that much of this, so we'll play a little bit of it and that's it. So another person with an agenda, clearly electric universe nutball, blah 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 blah. DraftScience guy here, start on plasma torus. So this is he calls it a plasma torus. So they take a very high velocity stream of water and smash it onto a piece of silicone or something, and it creates essentially a standing smoke wave, you know, at the source. So the atoms are smashed, they're at high velocity, they're highly ionized, which means they attract each other because they're all ionized in the same way. I mean, it's got to be the opposite way, right? Well, anyway, and they get into a swirling donut, a smoke ring, and he thinks that has some correlation to gravity. Somehow he thinks gravity is some sort of swirling thing, you know, and there's no evidence of that. Gravity is just a shadow, okay? That's all it is. It's just blocking a force, and if you block the force, if you absorb the force, it doesn't get where it's going, and therefore the thing it didn't hit is going to be feeling the pressure change. Alright, here they are getting the torus, a pressure gradient like gravity. So it's absolutely nothing like gravity. Not even the tiny bit close to gravity. And by definition, a torus is an even system, not an uneven system. That is, there's just as much energy going that way as there is going that way. That way and that way. Yeah, one side's going up, one side's going down. It's not a, by definition, its whole form is based on some balance. Okay, and like in an inductor coil, it's not going to be anything like an inductor either. The torus self-induces, so this is more magic talk, a magnetic field. There's no, all you can do is organize atoms, and when you do that, you can make them complementary in their polarization and therefore make them magnetic. But there's nothing special about movement. Movement doesn't make things magnetic. Organization does. There's nothing inside a magnet that's moving, retard. Sorry, idiot. Anyway, except for the external force that's being filtered by the magnet, of course. And like an inductor coil, a torus self-induces, there's no self-anything, a magnetic field, just like a carburetor our frozen or our Freon constructor induces a torus or eddy current around the construction. Again, you could just say smoke ring and we could be done. You can find simple examples of toruses, and yes, they're always created by some sort of high pressure circumstance. Not a big surprise. Has no correlation to gravity. And they are getting a self-sustained and self-drawing flow. So more baby talk of self-anything after the initial burst to get the flow started. Yes, the Earth is continuing to orbit the Sun. It's not self-orbiting. Okay, there's a real force affecting it constantly. As long as there is a plasma flow. No, as long as there is a charge particle, and the effects of the charged particles are to make them attract. Then look at how stars and galaxies are formed. Oh, they don't really have pictures of that retard. So shall I bother? Oh, here, fragments feed young galaxies. The young galaxies are billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of light years away. That is, they're in the past, and the pictures of them really suck. So, but go ahead, let's play the game. Spiraling fragments feed young galaxies. I'm sure there won't be any real picture here. Let's see. So these are all just animations. Blah 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 blah. Yes, no real evidence of any of this mush. So, but who cares? You think galaxies are being created in the universe? That's fine. You can go ahead and do that. I don't think they have any real understanding of a galaxy. So I don't think they understand that the galaxies are expanding. These are falling apart. Not because they're getting stronger and absorbing more matter and all that horse shit. Okay, so I don't think they have that anywhere close to correct. Alright, anyway. So this is so distant from the subjects on this channel. So you haven't really demonstrated with this cosmological crap any connection between gravity and toruses, any reason to believe it has anything to do with a torus, that there's all these particles in space that we somehow can't detect. I mean, the whole thing is just rubbish. Same patterns have been proven at Los Alamos Nuclear Lab in plasma flows. Says you again. And how Predit has shown galaxies are formed, and how some other idiot has shown that there is a convective and eddy current flow to galaxies. So just more made up crap. They can't even, I mean, the things are moving relative to our time scales so slowly. Eddy currents, oh please. Also, this gradient in the flux storage, just more baby talk, density has been proven by studying light passing near the sun. So where has that ever been proven? Scatter, you mean? Sorry, there's no hope for you. From pulsars and fast radio bursts, okay, flowing through ISM and the Marquillard convection. I don't know what that is. But whatever. You want to believe your little fairy stories about how you can bend light. Well, go ahead. I can't do much for you. There is no bending of light beyond the sun's atmosphere. Well, that's the truth, yes. But there is confirmed light slowdown. I'm sorry, confirmed. Dream on. Where Einstein predicts bending. Einstein doesn't predict it because the light slowed down, so that sounds like horseshit. With no such bending observed. So that sentence doesn't even make sense. There's no bending of light beyond the sun's atmosphere, but there's no bending there either. There's scatter. You wouldn't call bending. But there is confirmed light slowdown, where Einstein predicts bending. So he says light is slowing down. which is just as stupid as bending. So why should I think that's at all interesting? With no such bending observed. Obviously, if light has to travel through matter, it'll slow down, but the amount of matter it has to travel through is immense to be slowed down. That's why the speed of light in atmosphere is the same as the speed of light in vacuum, essentially, because it takes a lot of atoms to slow light down. There is also a slowdown and dispersion from fast radio bursts and pulsars. There is also a slowdown and dispersion from fast radio bursts and pulsars. That light slowdown is related to flux density, so more baby talk, of the atmosphere that the light passes through. Clearly, anytime light has to transition through matter, it can be affected. What does that have to do with anything meaningful? Okay, well, anyway, you're not going to change the speed of light by doing that. I mean, in the sense that you're not changing its fundamental properties. And one thing is also clear from refractive index and back EMF, more nonsense, okay, is that light slows down. That light slowdown, back EMF, and reflective index have a direct relation to magnetic flux density. So just more baby talk. Magnetic flux density. That's some sort of real thing. No, it really isn't. The reason there's no such thing as a magnetic monopole, oh, well, this ought to be good, is that due to the fact that the ether, not spelled with an A, medium is dipole. Well, that's just retarded. So whatever, how would making ether a dipole break the fact that there's clearly the electron fits every single one of the characteristics of being a monopole, and that the flow of dipole particles is the magnetic field? How so? Can any of you believers draw a picture of your ether functioning? A magnetic monopole is impossible, says you. That would be like water flowing into a garden hose and not coming out anywhere. Well, only if you believe all your wacky, swirly crap has anything to do with reality. I mean, you think all this flowy stuff is happening around all of this stuff, and you don't explain how all that flowy stuff knows that it's supposed to flow that way. You have no container. You're the one with no hose. You don't have any mechanism to force your stuff to do this weird crap. You don't have any force laws, retard. Or that would be like Dullard and Ken's faulty model of counter space. Well, if it's going to be like something that's counter space, then it's probably also fairly flawed and faulty. There are, however, monopoles of charge. Well, again, there's no distinction. You want to pretend there is, go ahead. When you put two charged monopoles together, what do you get? You get a dipole, right? So if I could electrically charge something at 200,000 volts and something positive 200,000 zero, and put them next to each other without discharging, what would I have? I would have a dipole. All right, and what if I put a bunch of those dipoles together? How would it not behave exactly like a magnet? Oh, that's right, it would. Okay, there are, however, a proton. A photon is an ether medium particle and a dipole particle. So just more you say so. There's just absolutely no evidence of it, though. Electricity is controlled by pressure differences. Well, that's agreeable. Between matter bits, between atoms in the ether medium. Well, sorry, there's no electricity without the atoms. Merklin convection and flux density proves this. Whatever, dream on. Your proof is invisible and non-existent. What happens in labs is the same thing as space. Not you have to have a very good lab to have a true vacuum. It is clear that the magnetic field acts as a fluid medium. Dream on. It's clear it doesn't. That controls the flow of electricity and plasma flows, so it's just all rubbish. The ether medium is the magnetic field we see flowing around all charged moving particles and celestial bodies. Dream on again. No evidence of any charge phenomenon, and magnetism is essentially a byproduct of charge, and so there's no evidence of any plus and minuses anywhere in space. Well, the furnace turned off. Good. When you have a constructed flow through an energy storage structure, whatever the hell, the constructed flow by conservation of energy, by some thing you're going to make up here, just by magic, because you're not going to explain why it's conserved. You're just going to say it does this, it swirls around, because it does. Diverts the momentum into a flow orthogonally to the main flow as the torus or energy storage pitch or plasmoid around the magnet. So there's no evidence of any plasmoids around a magnet. So, well, whatever. How much of this crap does this guy write? Well, I think we've got enough. Okay, here we go. We could get to this. She's mentioning the other tinfoil hatters. Let's see. Oh, it's more stuff here. Oh, so this is fractal woman nutty stuff. Let's see. This is what causes the isopotential lines in the ferrocell. There's no isopotential lines. Sorry, they don't exist as anything real. You want to pretend they're there, go ahead and pretend they're there, but they're not. Okay? In any more sense than how they are in any regular magnet. There's nothing new. Anyway, I've already explained the ferrocell, so what's the point? You people are just impervious to reason. Let's see, isopotential lines are the gradient is the same thing happens in space and Merkelian convection in a plasma flow. Well, again, there's just no evidence of the need for any of that complexity. Gravity is the inverse square law. It's a simple convergence. Doesn't need a fucking donut to make it. Okay, this flow orthogonal to the main flow. Well, we already did this kind of crap, but there's no flux storage in the Z pitch of the constructive flow in the ferrocell. It's a simple optical device. It's creating an optical illusion. The curved line doesn't exist anywhere. The magnet doesn't produce it. Your eye, okay, the photons produce the effect by incidentally, just the same way the rainbow isn't in the clouds. I mean, I made the example as clear as I can. Rainbows don't exist in the sky, as a thing. All right, it just has to do with the same angle of light hitting different places and getting the same effect to one location and creating a focus on you. And that's it. It's just geometry. But there is no rainbow in the sky. There's no physical structure to the rainbow. Okay, so the fractal woman is exactly on the right trail as are creators of the ferrocell. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, buy yourself if you won't watch the videos of what it looks like under a microscope and you want to keep pretending it's doing something magical, you can go ahead and keep pretending. I can't help you. You can see what the little bits are doing. You can do the experiment yourself and take one LED and see it makes one curved line. And you can understand that curved line doesn't have anything to do with what the magnet's doing. All right. There are isopotential lines as occur in Merkelian convection. So you're just impervious to reason. Gravity is a pressure gradient in the storage of flux around a rotating storage structure. It just amazes me that these fanatics, I mean, it's one thing for the average Ken imbecile to just say, okay, Ken, yeah, you told me about how reality works, but they wouldn't know one word from another. They wouldn't be able to regurgitate any of it. And these people seem to be able to regurgitate all of this bullshit rhetoric as if they know what the fuck they're talking about. As if any of this crap could mean anything to anybody rational. It's just amazing. Without a flow and a rotation around the flow, there can be no charge layers in the Earth's atmosphere. So just born nonsense. The charge layers in the atmosphere, the idea that the atmosphere is charged is quite obvious from phenomena like lightning, but it all has to do with the atoms. Without the atoms, there's no charge in the atmosphere, retard. It's not an ether phenomenon. Alright, well, anyway. You have to admire his, whatever that is. It must be like some sort of idiot savant system or something. He knows vocabulary and words, and he can type really fast, but he can't think. It's just he can't do anything normal. He can just regurgitate. So like I said, an idiot savant can hear Beethoven once and play it, and but he can't figure out how not to lick his feet or something. No. So this guy, here you go. These are just looks. I think it was Ken Wheeler videos. So they must be relevant, I think, to the fact that I must have mentioned these videos as an argument against Ken's really bad evidence. So maybe that's what he's providing. But again, these people who post these links without any description. Okay, so he puts a bunch of ferro fluid, which is oil-based, in a water bottle, and then seals it. And now he's going to push the bottle against a flat surface, and he's going to pretend he doesn't know that the hard plastic, because it's round, dimples up. When you push it in, it doesn't just make a flat surface, it dimples back the other way because the plastic is rigid, so it has to keep the round form. So it basically inverts the circle, and that the inverted plastic is creating the donut. It's just so obvious. And so this, it sort of goes to these donut heads, in terms of trying to argue that they found some mystery of the universe, and it's such a gimmick.
Gauss meter. As far as the flux reading,
let's see. Let's just do it again, just so we can see. So as he pushes it into the magnet, he'll dimple the plastic.
So the lens looks perfect. There we go. Now you can see the hourglass shape.
Yeah, well, that's what magnetism will do. Yes, that's nothing remarkable. It was clumping at both ends. Exactly. See, now he's pushing it in. So now he's pushing it in, which means the plastic dimples back up. So he's saying that somehow the magnet's creating the hole that you just saw. The magnet's doing it. No. Not even close to the truth.
All this nanoparticle mix.
Yes, right. Bullshit. Anyway. So they're just, this is just gimmick science. Look, the conventional physics is guilty of the same thing. They talk about their detector experiments with the two-slit. They don't even acknowledge the obvious, which is it doesn't do the gradient thing that they're sort of obligated to mathematically have in the photon experiment. And you could see that in the video yesterday where I showed you the lens with the light and those little lines and how perfect they are. No gradient at all. Well, they're supposed to be caused by the same process, so shouldn't they be gradually on and then gradually off? So, there's no, people just don't care how close it looks or how it's just this seems like thing, and they're just grasping at little seems likeses and say, well, it looks a little bit like, and therefore it is like. And so, they're just as guilty as the science they're attempting to debunk in terms of the chicanery. Let's just use gimmicks to prove our theory is correct. It's like the fake fossils the religious people, show up with, where, there's a fossilized human footprint inside of a dinosaur footprint or something. Just too stupid. Anyway. So, yeah, frankly, I think you ought to, here you go. I think you have to say more than that. If you're going to post links on videos, you don't just have blind links. Make an assertion. Or explain why you're posting the video. But it's just sort of bullshit to just post links. Alright. Hi Gary, I know this isn't related to the video, but that's not important. Well, it sort of is. I forget where you said this, but I heard you said something about how you can explain why two beams of light seem to go right through each other. But this gives me another question. Well, yeah, I'm saying force can't in any functional way interact with force. This, they hit each other and they reflect, would be just the same as missing each other. If I was to hit you with a bullet, right, shoot a gun, and the idea was that the bullet hit something here, okay, in the middle of space, and the bullet reflects and comes back into my gun, but this thing here also goes that way towards you. Isn't that the same as me just shooting you with the gun? Anyway. Explain why two beams of light seem to go right through each other. But this gives me another question. How is it that you can even point a flashlight in a direction and get the photons to all go that way? Well, they're coming off surfaces and they're not going that way, right? The atom that's emitting the photon, it emits like the little bit of stuff. It can emit it this way, it can emit it this way, it can emit it in any forward direction, okay, in the whole 360-degree half sphere. So it can go in any one of those directions at any moment, theoretically. Like if photons can only be moving in 3 directions, or 6 if you count opposites, how does the beam of light pointed in a direction actually end up going in that direction with your theory? Well, flashlights are obviously using a reflector to help. Okay, so they're not as directional as you think on their own. The light bulb itself doesn't have any directionality, right? So if I turn a light bulb on, in a room on a stick or something, there'll be the same amount of light almost everywhere, unless you go like underneath the light bulb, and then there's a little bit of a shadow where the base of the light bulb is screwed in and there's no light going to be able to get there. But pretty much the light is pretty even. Anyway, wouldn't it only be possible for the beam of light to go in 6 different directions? So I don't know, you're taking these dimensional arguments a little bit too seriously, in the sense that it's not some sort of thing where every atom can only do this or this or this in some kind of rigid way. Like each atom is going to be in a different mood or a different position to start with. So yes, the individual atoms are being governed by perpendicular rules, but their orientation, there's no rule regarding that in a lot of cases. But in some cases there are, and that's why you can get culminated beams of light, is because you're able to arrange the atoms a little more rigidly, and so then their output is a little more consistent. Let's see how I was going to explain it. I suppose you're not thinking in terms of the atoms are the things producing the consequence, and they're really small, and they're not that easy to control. I don't know how to say it. Anyway, the guns are fairly random. Hopefully this isn't a dumb question, but most of the comments are stupid as fuck anyway, so whatever. Alright, well, I mean, this whole subject of light is, is as Professor Lewin concedes, as Einstein conceded. Okay, 2 years before he died, Einstein said, I've been studying photons for 50 years, and I haven't improved my understanding one iota. So it's a pretty bold statement, saying that these things are hard to understand. And so that's why I'm just sort of pointing out some of these overt facts and such. So let's see, maybe I should use these straight lines. Maybe that might work better. It won't look as bad. You can make arrows that way too, right? So the point sort of is that a photon has a wavelength. And the wavelength is sort of proportional to this other thing, which you could call. So let's say we said this was the wavelength. So maybe we'll draw photons in some new way to describe them. And the idea would be is that the little bit of energy that defines the photon could be in any one of these locations on these lines. So there could be a little bit that is that piece of the wavelength. And then there's another piece on some other line, in some other position. But the real point is the atom is this. Okay, I mean, the atom is this little tiny thing by comparison to the size, the dimensions of what we call a photon. So clearly, the photon is really a composite. It's being made of. Let's see. Yeah, you can sort of make dots with the line. Yeah, it's just switching tools is sort of a pain in the ass. So, the energy is going into the system of atoms, and the system of atoms is producing a certain amount of energy back out. So it's, in a certain form, and in certain percentages. So a certain percentage leaves off the surface, a certain percentage is going into the atoms and creating a disturbance of some kind, and depending on the material, you might get electricity out of it. So the photon energy goes in, and you get a flow of pressure between the atoms. Or if it's a transparent medium, the energy comes in, gets broken into these pieces, and a representation of the energy still comes out the other side. With some minor diminishment in its, in its perfection. It can't be completely lossless, obviously, because, well, you can see if I make the surface, these are just little facts, right? I mean, you polish a glass surface, you can change how much light's reflecting theoretically, and you could get it down to zero, and it'll cycle through. As you take off more, you go from 0 to 2% to 4% to 8% to 16% of the light reflecting. So at certain thicknesses, you can have a lot, 16% of the light will reflect off the glass, and then another thickness, you can make it 0%. But it's not that easy to do. Newton took the time to figure it out, which must have been a bit time intensive. But anyway, so obviously, theoretically, in most cases, you're not going to get all your energy back in the image that you see through the glass. And you can sort of get that. And the thicker glass is, it's not quite the same image. But anyway, it's energy in, energy out. And the interesting thing is the fact that the energy is going in, it's being collected by a series of atoms. So it's like me making a detector, which they've done now, where they make little photo detectors. They make a whole screen of them. And then they make a panel that emits photons, little LEDs. And they, use the pattern of light that comes in to create a projection that comes out. And they kind of can make an invisible panel. They can move it around, and, as long as you don't look at it from sideways angles, it will project whatever's coming in, and it'll almost look invisible. Okay, so, but that's sort of what atoms are doing naturally, is they're taking the energy that comes in, they're taking pieces of the different photons that come in. So the idea would be is there's a whole bunch of these photons coming in here at all kinds of different angles and at some phase differences. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of this stuff coming in. That is, there's stuff at all kinds of different positions. I guess this big arrow thing it's good for showing that the photon is big, but it doesn't really get to the point that point I wanted to emphasize, which is the little bit. Didn't make a very big bit. The little bit is just in one spot on here. Okay, so it's just a representation of where the little bit of energy could be in space. And really, they all should be on these lines. So the little bit should all be on one of these lines. So I guess that's one way of drawing it, is that there's these lines coming in where the little bits are to make your frequency, but there's only one spot on each line, okay, for each photon. There's only one place. Oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. I have to change the tool to make a circle. So the photon is just, in these positions. Well, anyway, so you have a bunch of this little stuff coming in with all the photons hitting one location, and they're all at different frequencies. They're all different. Well, not, if it's white light. And point is that the surface interprets it. The surface absorbs all the energy in these crystals of the metal, or in the case of clear things, the glass, and the atoms transfer that energy rather coherently from, I'm getting hit, with a certain amount of energy, and it transmits it to this other side, where the other side, the atoms, have felt the pressure. So you can understand that the atoms on the surface of something are always in a really different atmosphere than all of the electrons, are in a completely different atmosphere than the rest of the electrons in the material. The rest of the electrons in the material are all being kind of shared and are attached magnetically to each other, by charge, by attraction to protons and repulsion by electrons. So they're all tied to each other. But the electrons on the surface are under a completely different circumstance, in the sense that their pressure is the new surface, the new material. And generally speaking, you can't really smash two things together without trapping air between them. You can't just, I can't just force this hand to become this other hand, and the two hands are now have as strong a bond as the chemical bonds of my hand. I can't make that bond, so the two don't blend into each other and become one material. And so clearly those electrons are in a completely different circumstance, and so they are reacting. So they're getting hit, they're sending the message to all the electrons that are bound. The message goes pretty consistently through the material, and then the other side of the material, the electrons are in that exposed free kind of condition, and they're the ones moving to shoot the new photons. And shooting a photon really means you're retracting, you're coming back towards the material, and as you come back towards the material, you're shooting the bits. Just have to make sure that's correct. Yes, you're releasing them as you're coming back. And so you're releasing gravity, essentially. See, when you absorb the energy, right, when you take its momentum and move, you reflect the energy back out. And so if you're coming back in at a certain pulsed rate, by absorbing the stuff from the atmosphere at that rate, you're reflecting, essentially, what will become the new photon. So the new photon is essentially made out of gravity coming in the other side. And it's a reflection of the gravity, sort of. An extra absorption, you could argue. So, the electron is perturbed by the energy. See, the electron could be going the other way, technically. you can, when you're hitting the surface, the real reaction that the other surface is going to feel is you going back in. So you penetrate the surface, you make a hole in it, you poke it, and then when it goes back the other way, that's the signal you're sending to the other side of the glass. So you're sending a retraction, a moving back in, and that's the one releasing the photon. All right, but I don't know if I want to get into more of that. It's it's obviously going to be a little more complicated than simple gun mechanics. So the gun mechanics is going to be more like we're all shooting guns. There's a bunch of us shooting guns, and we all have a similar trigger speed, we could say. So we're all shooting red light, but we're pulling the trigger at different times, just a little bit different. And now there's a whole bunch of these bullets heading for a surface. And now the surface is going to interpret those bullets and to some extent do it accurately, represent each one of those impacts and send them to the other surface. I mean, light slows down in glass, so to speak. I mean, but the slowdown is just because now electrons moving is what's transmitting the light's effect. So there's essentially little balloons on the other side, and we're shooting. Balloons would be the wrong way to know it. There's cans, and so if 3 bullets go into, so you imagine the cans, and the cans move each time they get hit. And if they move 3 times, that is 3 bullets go in a can, that can, triggers a response. So we're all shooting. Some of our bullets will all hit the same can, and that can will move, and then that can's movement will be transmitted. And that's really how the thing is working. It's taking some part of what my bullets are doing and some part of what your bullets are doing and combining it to say this is what the bullets are doing. But it's not the original bullets, but in a sense it's completely dependent on what the original bullets are doing. So that's the wave-particle duality in essence, is that it is particles, but clearly the particles are mixing. So it's not like a photon is a single particle. The photon is made of a bunch of particles, and it's so again, I think the easier point to make is if you just think of the stuff as being rays of force, and then understand that rays can be kind of wide. There can be a lot of width to where the boats are lined up, or however you want to think of the Armana. Or even go back to the soldier argument, and what you're calling a photon is a platoon. So so there has to be a group of soldiers, a group of soldiers, and that's going to define a photon is a certain amount of action in a specific amount of time, and that's what's going to get recognized by the system. The system says how many soldiers went into the can. Well, I don't know how to. I'll have to come up with some better analogies. And but the discreteness is in the soldiers. The waveness is in the way they're being sent, and they're not being sent in some perfect wave. So it just doesn't serve any purpose to. You have to recognize the individuality of the soldier to really get it. You're not going to get it if you're thinking waves of soldiers, right? You have to get it because you understand it elementally. It's made of soldiers, and you're just trying to explain why do soldiers behave as if they're in waves. Well, they behave that way because that's how we're shooting them. That's how we're sending them in clumps. All right, well, I can't. I shouldn't say I can't. There probably is a way of saying this where the people who are attached to some wave notion can just understand that you can still have your waves, but you just have to understand the waves are made of something. They're not just they're not elemental. There's no such thing as an elemental wave. That the waves are a byproduct, and that they're moving waves, they're traveling waves. So clearly they have to be made of something. They're just not lumps in a material. And if they are, you have to explain what the material is. So is there any point? No, there really isn't. The ether doesn't accomplish anything. I can just keep saying it, but you want to make the universe out of dominoes. Okay. My argument to you isn't that just making it more complicated? Because the dominoes are going to do the same thing as me just flipping one domino and knocking him, making him fly 6 feet and land somewhere. Well, the dominoes would do the same thing. If I had a high enough density of dominoes, they were all small enough, they would do exactly the same thing. So what do I need the ether for? It doesn't serve any real purpose if I can understand just using something that flies. Why bother? You can make it out of stuff that just moves. And if you make your dominoes, see, the problem with your ether theories is you have to make them moving. Because they're the force. That's what gravity is. Gravity isn't some new thing in a field of dominoes. It's movement. And then you have to make your dominoes completely capable of bouncing back up and all this other stuff, and there's no sense to it. There's no reason to do it. Alright, well, anyway, I could say it better, and maybe I'll work on saying it better. So anyway, enough of a video and such. I think it's enough. Oh, well, maybe I'll just pause and think about it, but it's probably enough. Alright, back for a little bit more. I just was thinking about the two-slit, and I just wanted to, add a little bit to attempt to explain how complex this gets, in the sense that, alright, so the photons have a polarization, and when they do the two-slit experiment, they often talk about this. They don't have the slit width in the math. They just make it approximately the wavelength of the light, which essentially is the polarization of the light. So and I don't really like the word polarization for the spread, okay, of what is a bunch of particles. So as I'm pointing out, they're just particles. I have to do the pen thing. Particles at a distance, but they can be in different positions. So the idea is the wavelength, that is, this distance would be the same essentially as this distance approximately. There's no law, frankly. So a photon would be something that looks like this. Okay, so imagine they're at the same distance from each other, it's traveling through space, and that this width is really a substantial width. So this width of the slit would be the same as the width of these particles. So you could sort of understand that if a photon was coming in here and it had this kind of irregular width, alright, that some portion of the photon is getting broken. Alright, it's going to be absorbed by the material. So a lot of the photons are going to have pieces of the photon scraped off. So this one and this one would just disappear, you could argue, right? I mean, this one would disappear and this one would disappear. Well, I'll undo that. Okay, I have to sneak up on it. Alright, so now this is the only stuff that's going to get through. And similarly, this is happening to a lot of the photons. So they're getting broken as they're going through the slit. Broken. And what they're encountering is on this surface is the electrons are on the surface. Alright, and there's extra electrons on the surface of everything because there's still protons that are attractive in there. And those electrons are saying, I'd like to hang around. Now they're not hanging around as close or as tight because there's not as much gravity, essentially. So it's a little bit further out. It's in weaker gravity. It's in a weaker attraction to the proton. So it's a lot more, you can knock it around easy. And anyway, so some of these photons aren't going to just plow into the surface, but some of them are going to hit that stuff too. And by hitting the electrons, they're going to be changed in their angle. Oh, I can't do that. No, no, no. I guess we'll do this. So they come through and the little bit moves in a new direction. Okay. because it hits an electron. The electron moves, readmits it, and so it's just one little bit. This is, I'm just showing its path. All right, so you have these different paths, but it is a combination. Now you have to put the photon back together. One little bit landing over here won't mean anything. So one bit landing here, okay, that's not going to be a photon. It needs a few of them to get there, and so others are going to also have to be deflected and end up in this location. And they're going to have to be deflected at a similar frequency. The frequency needs to be kept, so they have to be in the right order. But you can have like 3 of them here, and then you could have 2 at this distance, and then you could have just 1 at this distance, and you could have 5 at this distance. So there's no rules about how they're remade. Well, there are rules, but the only one that's going to, this is only going to be 1 photon, in the sense that only the energy is only consistent for the 1. You know, and so if you had 3, let's say here, then you'd say, well, these 2 will be deciding how much impact this collection has. The collection will only be seen as being essentially 2 photons. So you can sort of get it, because what they're going to have to do is actually hit the surface, and again, they're hitting the surface over a large area, so they're hitting a lot more than just 1 atom. So they're going to be collected by more than 1 atom, and all of these atoms have to register these hits and recombine them into an amount of energy. And through that process, you can just sort of see this as like a composite, and then the composite comes out of here. So everything that hits this whole group of atoms will essentially be restored here. So this order, if there was another pile coming in and it hit here, it can add more to the order. So it could add another one at this location. So, you know, and so now you have 3 photons, and you can, you know. So the point would be is this sums it, and the sum, you know, is what goes into the substance and can be transmitted out if it's clear, or reflected. Okay, but the reflection is going to be another composite product of what went in. So anyway, so it's a little more complicated than either particle or wave, frankly. But it's less complicated in wave in the sense that the interference isn't interference. Okay, the interference, none of these photons interfere with each other. So that's not going to happen. They'll either able to constructively remake themselves, or they won't. So there's no destructive interference. There's either remake the photon, or you didn't remake the photon. Okay, you were able to remake one, or you weren't able to remake one. And that might have to do with the phase change you get from some other location. So this one gets bent this way, and this one comes from this direction, but they have the same phase. So they will restore the photon. So you're taking an element of energy from over here and an element of energy from over here to make the photon, because this thing will add it up, and it won't care where it came from. It'll just care that it's getting hit by energy, 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 energy at a specific frequency. It'll just add up how much total energy did I get hit by, and how much of it was at the right frequency. And that's all it's going to care about. That's all that's going to get transmitted or converted into electricity. The transmission is essentially something that undoes the conversion into electricity, or again, the fact that it all just reflects, or it goes in and reflects out as infrared. Its frequency is essentially destroyed as the old frequency, and it just readmits it at the frequency that's built into the atoms, the amount of tension in the atoms. Alright, so that's probably enough of an add-on. So there's probably a better way to illustrate this, but that's why it gets complicated. Photons are broken by surfaces first, and then they're recombined by the fact that the electrons send different bits to different locations. All right. until the next time and such.